Recently, Joe Rogan had a gentleman on his podcast who was rocking a John 3:16 t-shirt with the bleach blonde hair and the bleach blonde handlebar mustache with the bandana on his head and the sunglasses. And if you don't know who I'm talking about, this gentleman that he had on was Hulk Hogan. Now, with this whole podcast, guys, we will be discussing the discussion that they had with Hulk Hogan growing up in the church and how he fell away from the church and then how he was brought back to the church and brought back to Christ. But I'm also going to talk about a very concerning teaching that Hulk Hogan believes in and was discussing with Joe Rogan that they highly disagreed on in this podcast. So, with all that being said, guys, if you don't know who Hulk Hogan is, he is world-renowned WWE pro wrestler, champion. He's been in that business for a very long time. Everybody who knows anybody knows who Hulk Hogan is. He had his own reality TV show, The Hogans. And so there was a lot surrounding Hulk's life. And everybody was loving him, and he was living it up. And on the outside, you would think, man, he is just living a life that I wish I could live, man. Look, he's got no issues, no concerns, nothing's going wrong in this man's life. But inwardly, he was falling apart, and he admits that on this podcast. But with that, guys, Hulk Hogan talked to Joe Rogan about his faith, and it was very interesting how it was brought up kind of randomly, but Hulk Hogan brought it up and talked about how he grew up in the church. His grandparents took him to church and couldn't get him out, basically. And he was just faithfully attending, reading his Bible, doing those things. And then eventually, as he got older, he got into a band. And from there, he just kind of fell away from the church and fell away from the Lord and just kind of put that on the back burner while he just kind of lived his life as a young man. And then from there, eventually, he rolled into wrestling and he got into the WWE. And of course, that's a whole other kind of beast when it comes to the people you're surrounded with and the things that are surrounding you with drugs, women, lust, drinking, partying, all those things. And Hulk Hogan admits that he and his boys at WWE fell into that hard. And so he really stepped away from the Lord and the church for a good while in his life. But eventually, he said, after hitting rock bottom, he got himself back to his faith. And he said that's when he actually became a Christian. So he didn't confess that he was a Christian at a young age, at a young boy, but said when he got older is when he became a born-again believer. And so this all sounded super encouraging. Joe's listening to this. Joe Rogan was also distracting him. He was talking about the size of his arms, and he wanted to see his arms, and you could see Hulk Hogan was like, hey, man, like, you're distracting me. I'm trying to share something with you. He's sharing his heart with Joe Rogan, and Joe Rogan really didn't really want to hear it. And but he kept going. And so even with those distractions, when Joe would cut him off, Hulk Hogan would get back on track and finish what his thought was and his sentence was on whatever he was talking about when it came to Christ and the Bible and the church and just kind of his personal testimony. So I was very encouraged to hear all of that. But there was one thing that really concerns me with Hulk Hogan's theology and doctrine, and that is you can speak things into existence. See, when it comes to this teaching, a lot of new believers will fall into this teaching of this mysticism, this very much so. It's charismatic, but it's more of that wild side of charismatic. It's charismania. It's what you see in Bethel, and especially in Bethel, like you see, I'm going to speak things into existence. My thoughts become things. The mysticism. The Secret is a movie or a book that came out, and so it's like you fall into this trap of that, and that's kind of where Hulk Hogan's at right now. He says, he can think thoughts that come throughout, and he can speak things into existence, and he says it's biblical, and it's not. Nowhere in the Bible do we see a man speaking something into existence. Nowhere in the Bible do we see our thoughts becoming things. We actually have to apply it. We have to put our hands and feet to work in order for something like that to happen. It doesn't just happen because we think it or we speak it. So, yes, the thoughts and how what we say can motivate us, but that has no power in itself. We have to actually do the acts. And so, Joe Rogan highly disagreed with him. Interesting enough, Joe Rogan did not disagree with him on his faith. He did not push back on his faith. Didn't do that, but he did push back on this, which was very encouraging for me with Joe. Is he's definitely softened his heart with Christianity and faith in itself. Now, Joe Rogan says it's good for anybody to believe anything they want, any God. I would love for Joe Rogan to say that it's good for somebody to believe in Jesus Christ and Him alone. Obviously, one day I'd love to hear Joe say that. But for now, I'm thankful for Joe's response, and I'm thankful Joe pushed back on Hulk Hogan on this topic. Now, what does this mean for us, guys? Well, really, I could be praying, you could be praying for Hulk Hogan and his journey and his walk with the Lord. I don't know Hulk Hogan's heart personally, but hey, he's bold enough to sit there on Joe Rogan's podcast, talk about his faith, give his testimony, talk about Christ. That's encouraging, and that's encouraging for me. And I can pray that this whole mysticism, speak things into existence, thoughts become things. I pray that that goes away quick. Somebody in his life can really show him that the Bible does not teach that. And as well as Joe Rogan praying that, I mean, he has had professing Christians on his podcast more and more lately, but I'm ready for somebody who is a bold professing Christian who knows their theology, who knows their doctrine, who's sound in that, to go on Joe Rogan's podcast and have an actual discussion about Christ, the Bible, the bodily resurrection, the death of Christ being nailed to the cross, Him raising again, the gospel discussion being totally fleshed out so Joe's eyes can continue to be opened and his heart can continue to be softened.